It's January 1st, and we've got a really special episode today. Paul Raphaël, Felix and Paul Studios, incredible trailblazing storyteller in the spatial computing space. Paul, like many, was inspired by the DK1, took it to some really interesting lengths, was unsatisfied with the state of cinematic VR cameras, so he built one of the first cinematic high-definition cameras and then built another version to send into space. Felix and Paul are the storytellers behind some of the most groundbreaking, most beautiful, most genre-bending, shall we say, kinds of VR. Now, at Area 15 in Las Vegas, Felix and Paul have launched their newest experience, Interstellar Arc, which transports you light years into the future, light years into other galaxies, and gives you a taste at what it's like to be an interstellar explorer in a new world. These aren't the kind of stories that you can tell or show or share in a traditional way. One of the reasons why I'm so excited to talk with Paul and so excited to share this conversation with you is that Paul doesn't just approach futuristic problems with the same tools. He meets the story where it needs to be and figures out how to tell that part and is willing to sacrifice anything that doesn't support it and fit. The results speak for themselves. Take a listen, like, subscribe, share y'all. The Tech Glow Up, first episode 2026. Hello and welcome to the Tech Glow Up. I'm Nathan C., and today I have a very special guest, Paul Raphaël of Felix and Paul Studios. He's the Chief Innovation Officer and co-founder. Paul, it is so lovely to talk with you today. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Goodness, co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer could mean so many things. For those out there who aren't just obsessed about immersive storytelling, can you introduce yourself and the work that you do at Felix and Paul?
Sure. Felix, myself, and Stefan, our third co-founder, started the studio in 2013. We actually go further back professionally, but that's when we started the studio and focusing on virtual reality. At the time, we had transitioned from being more film-focused to more immersive storytelling focused. Not in VR yet, but with the release of the Oculus Rift Kickstarter, our minds were blown. As rudimentary as that thing was compared to what we've got today, we knew this was the eventual future of storytelling. We shifted everything we were working on towards virtual reality. We started by designing what was the first cinematic virtual reality camera at the time, creating the first VR 360 3D experience, Strangers with Patrick Watson, a Montreal musician. I found a way to force the headset onto Palmer's Lucky's face at CES in 2014. It was a demo of a test shoot that we had done. And then that started a relationship with Oculus, which became a relationship with Facebook and then Meta. Basically, since then, we've been focused on those two things, the creative development of virtual reality storytelling, but through that, a lot of technology development. So starting with that first camera and many other cameras, eventually cameras that were sent into space. And more recently, we've been focused on large-scale, location-based virtual reality experiences. So experiences for up to over 150, 60, 70 people, free roaming in a large open space, collectively experiencing a virtual reality story.
Oh, goodness. I want to dive in to this like 160 person free roam experience, but I'm going to wait just a little bit. This origin story of starting in media, moving into immersive, and So very 12 years ago, very early, pre-DK1 is like a very notable, um, and like you said, VR it was mind-blowing, but also required like a suitcase and of gear and maybe a couple hours to get set up before you could really dive in. What about virtual reality then caught your attention and triggered that inspiration that you've been able to follow for over a decade since?
Maybe I'll start by talking about what
Yeah.
drew us to immersive storytelling. I was since I was a child, I think I was 9 or 10 when I started making movies, and I always imagined I would, one day hoped I would become a filmmaker, and studied film. And within cinema, there were certain movies that I found had a more immersive quality than others. And by that, I mean almost like films that left space for the viewer, right? Usually these were slower paced films that would have less cuts and longer takes, and there'd be like a psychological, almost spiritual quality to them. And these were the kind of films we loved and we aspired to make. At some point in the early mid 2000s, there was a lot of immersive kind of projection experiences, projection mapping. Immersive theater was becoming bigger, mixing media, right? Interactivity, all this stuff. And we're like, okay, this is a more native way of immersing someone by literally, physically having them be a part of the experience. We did a few projects of that kind, and eventually, this was just before VR, we got into 3D filmmaking, but we were using 3D films as a means to creating immersive installations rather than making a 3D film. And so the nuance there is, rather than making a film, at the time Avatar was pretty big, and that certainly was an influence, but you could watch it in multitude of different sized screens. 3D TVs were a thing too. You could watch it at home on a screen that was 100 times smaller than the one in the theater. The vantage point was never the same, right? So what you had is a film with depth, but it wasn't correct in any way. It wasn't representative of scale or anything like that. Still an immersive effect and very interesting. But we were like, what if we could log down those variables, right? Have a specific size screen, sweet spot to watch that, and then filming for that, for those specifications, right? Now, of course, in the process, we would dramatically reduce our potential audience, but we were like, hey, the effect would be worth it. And we did some experiments in that vein, some documentary, some fiction. And the effects were on people was mind blowing. Like, people were coming out of these screenings as if they had some kind of psychedelic experience, right? And we were just like, okay, well, this is not a financially viable path, but it's just so cool and so interesting artistically, and the impact this can have is like we just kept going until the day we tried the DK1. And of course, VR wasn't a new thing, but the DK1 kind of was pointing towards not so distant future where this could be accessible to everyone. And the minute we tried it, we were like, okay, this, you could see with smartphone televisions, resolution was going up. The things were getting smaller, thinner. They were like, okay, well, it's a matter of years before this thing is 4K per eye and got a better form factor and all this stuff. A little longer than expected, but still very, very quickly, it went from 720p, 1080 to 4, whatever. And it made a huge difference. And so anyway, we fell in love with the medium. And of course, the first thing we wanted to do, coming from a film background, was get filmed in there. So while there were a lot of Unreal and Unity kind of games and demos, the extent to which there were films in there were 360 monoscopic films that had been maybe made for the internet or for domes. No one had combined stereoscopy at scale in 360, which, when you think about it, really, it's a contradiction, right? When you want to shoot a panoramic image or a 360 image, you want to shoot everything from a single point. That's the definition of 360, panoramic image. And then when you want to shoot 3D, you need 2 points. we had to figure out you obviously have to cheat somewhere, and then how do you do that? And we had to crack that. And once we cracked that, it was the most incredible artistic journey of, okay, we've got a new medium. This is literally a new medium, possibly the ultimate medium. And by that, the most flexible and maybe the last, in the sense that the way you might get the immersive imagery and audio and interactivity may change and evolve over time. Eventually, it might become a chip, something that's beamed directly to your consciousness. But the fact that you can create an experience that every aspect of your experience, maybe not certain senses, but certainly the audio visuals, to completely take over that and to make the audience experience absolutely whatever you can imagine. I don't know what could, what else, what could be better than that, right? Or what could be more powerful than that?
Yeah. You said several things that just totally grabbed my imagination. I'm so inspired to hear that, like, your early inspirations around virtual reality storytelling were informed from this sort of physical, immersive, sharing the directorial chair a little bit with the audience, right? Like that example of, we were inspired by films that give space to the viewer, was like the opposite of that was always my complaint about early virtual reality. It is very much like you're on a single track carnival ride and you can only look at or enjoy, the things that the director has put in front of you. And sometimes those are very good, but I'm a curious completist. And so many times I'd be like looking behind me when somebody was trying to talk to me. And I saw that there was this rest of the world and kept wanting that agency. You started your VR filmmaking with that idea of a collaborative agency with the viewer. You've talked a lot about storytelling and the inspiration. One of the hardest things I found in explaining that aha moment of virtual reality to people is that it's a see it to believe it kind of technology, right? Until you are immersed, until you see everything around you, until you have those experiences, it's hard to imagine what it's like. And you're like hinting at the future of immersive could be in brain-computer interfaces, kind of neural links. My product marketer brain just slumped over. It was like, how do you explain to somebody what neural content looks like? How do you, so I'm just going to put that there.
Look, in some ways, it's the easiest thing to explain, and in others, it's the hardest, right? Because it's called virtual reality. The word reality is in there. It's like reality. It's not quite as high fidelity as reality, but it certainly aspires to be, and in many ways, that's the experience you get, is an experience of reality. Now, reality can be lifelike, it could be dreamlike, it could be completely abstract, it could be a lot of things. But ultimately, it's a lot less of an abstracted medium than almost every other medium we've ever had, including literature and television, film. Certainly, when you combine senses, virtual reality is the closest thing to a natural, human-centric medium. And the reason it's so hard to explain, though, is because when people think of any form of media, they are used to the legacy, the classical, what they know, right? Even though those are highly abstracted mediums. Like a 16:9 rectangle that's flat and that's moving. It's certainly lifelike as well, right? Like I'm looking at you and I'm imagining, it's not that abstract, but it's certainly more abstract than seeing you across from the table in 3D and being able to look wherever I want in the scene at any given point. The other challenge that comes with that is, while cinema is a more abstracted representation of reality, it has about 100 years of evolution, and people have mastered and developed all the tricks and ways to suspend this belief, and then there's style, and that evolves through time and depending on the artist, and that's all great. With VR, we've been doing it for 12 years and we're still barely scratching the surface of how to do that well. How do you basically have to reinvent everything? I think a lot of the dangers of a lot of the danger in VR is not fundamentally enough rethinking how to create for it. And not just for entertainment, like even if you're going to create an application, an interface, how do you browse the web? Like what we've been seeing is taking the 2D traditional ways of doing things and just bringing them into VR, which makes sense as a stepping stone to what it will eventually become. But it's really, really early days at almost every level. And that creates a barrier. And so what I think has been nice about storytelling or creating entertainment in VR is you don't have to worry about a lot of these things, right? So I often tell the story of my late aunt who, weeks before she passed away, she was someone who had never gotten into any form of modern technology like smartphones or laptops or anything like that. She was actually quite afraid of these things, right? I remember for years she was playing with the idea of getting an iPad or a tablet, but she never did it. Every time I saw her, she'd be like, what would you recommend? And then she would just always be too scared to go ahead with it. We, around that time, had just filmed or put together some of our first footage from the ISS. And I was trying to convince her to put the headset on and have a look. She was like, no way. Like, I don't want to hold a smartphone. You think I'm going to put this contraption on my face? And then I told her that this is actually a simulation of reality to the point where you don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to put this thing on. You won't have to figure anything out. You're just going to be somewhere else for a few minutes and we'll take it off if you're uncomfortable. And then that's it. And she watched the whole thing and she came out in tears and she couldn't believe that this was possible. And I think as high tech as that was compared to every other technology out there, it was actually high tech enough that it's finally becoming more natural. And I think that's where XR is heading. It's a lot more like what our media should be like, I think.
Yes. Oh, that showing people beautiful scenery that they haven't been able to be at before is by far one of the easiest ways to get somebody into virtual reality. We took a Quest like 3 the last time we went to visit family in Japan, and my wife, who is not really a techie, was just like, look at these undersea videos. She was so excited to give the cousins and grandparents this view. We've been talking a lot about story. Your title is Chief Innovation Officer, and you've hinted several times about in this process to tell a good story, you've also invented several cameras and other devices to like help give yourself the tools that you need to level up. So I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about, not every storyteller is also building technologies and cameras. Can you talk about that part of Felix and Paul's process and the innovative work?
Yeah, that's always been my thing. Ever since I was a kid, I was into filmmaking, but I was also into computers and programming. And I remember at the time jumping onto the digital editing wave very early on in film school. That was extremely frowned upon, at least where I went. It was a very traditional film-based, right? Steenbeck and 16 millimeter film, which is beautiful and great and amazing. And nowadays it's a luxury to shoot on film. No shade on that, but the flexibility that came with nonlinear editing and then also, visual effects. I was really fascinated by what you could do with 3D Maya and things like After Effects. And so I was always fascinated by the new thing that you could have someone experience because of the advancements in technology and just how much more accessible it was. When I was a kid, there were already movies like Jurassic Park and T2, and it wasn't that I was one of the first people to it, but it had reached a point where as a kid, as a teenager, I could do it at home. So that was crazy. You have a wider palette of possibilities at a younger age, which I feel like somehow expands your concept of what's possible as you project yourself into the future, right? So I was really always interested in that kind of spot. And it wasn't, technology for technology's sake. It was, what can the technology allow you to make someone feel? It was always about making people feel things. It's more than story. It's more than about storytelling. Story is a means to the end of making someone feel something, right? So oftentimes we've created things, experiences that were very light, if not completely devoid of what would be easily identifiable as storytelling. There's always a story because we're making the thing, and it's a selection of things. So it's, in that sense, a curated thing. And it's like a gray scale of, well, is that story or not? At some point it becomes story, I guess, more commonly accepted as story. And then eventually it's like, well, that was clearly like a 3-act structure, hero's journey. And, there's no question there. But, when we're creating whatever we're creating, it's almost a secondary concern whether and how much story is actually in the experience. And really, it's all optimized for making the person feel not just something, but the thing that we want the person to feel. We'll dose as much or as little story, or as much or as little silence, or as much or as little anything, with that goal in mind.
I'm so heartened by this perspective. A lot of my critiques of early immersive, early VR stories, like, directly speak to doing it in an opposite order, right? We have this technology. We want to tell a Star Wars story. How do we put Darth Vader? You back it out from there to the user experience and things. So absolutely love it. So you're sort of hinted that you've got this curiosity, this drive, and kind of a builder's mindset. Right now you're working on something pretty big. You're not just building cameras, but you're building a whole purpose-built space for hundreds of people. Can you talk a little bit more about Interstellar Arc that you've been working on, and this experience that'll be launching? I guess it's launched in Vegas as of the time of this airing.
Yeah. So from what was traditionally what we did at the studio, cinematic, not or very little interactive experiences, right? That were usually just distributed on the platforms. Most of our work is released on Meta's platform, some of it on other platforms that no longer exist. When we were working on the Space Explorers, the ISS experience, which was meant to be also just another at-home documentary series, it was quite the ordeal to make that project, but the release strategy was the same as every other project. About halfway through filming, we realized we just had to find a way to get more people to see this thing. And by more, I don't just mean in numbers. I mean in types of people, right? The types of people that wouldn't normally have headset. Now, of course, people who have headsets also show it to people who don't have headsets, but we wanted to have a point of entry that was more universal. And also, while we had shown our work in festivals and galleries throughout the years, the throughput it was always minuscule. This was about the time the original Quest came out. And we realized, you know what, this is actually the first time we could imagine creating something that was very large scale, right? Location based. We very quickly had the idea of creating a virtual ISS that you could walk through and see other people, and then geolocalize snippets of the content we had filmed rather than watching but in chunks of 30 minutes, which was how the documentary series was made, 4 episodes of 30 minutes. Here, all the content we had shot, and maybe some of that wasn't in the series, didn't make the cuts, would be available just as you discover it as you walk around a virtual ISS. And so we partnered with Phi Studio, who's been part of our story since our very beginning. And we designed the Infinite and launched it in Montreal. It was meant to be this one-time thing at first. Like, we're going to do this thing. It'll be cool. And that'll be... By the time we launched and shortly after, we're like, wow, no, this is actually... First of all, this thing's we're going to tour this thing. After Montreal, we went to Houston, and it was a huge success there. Everyone who worked on the project at NASA brought all their friends and family, and the astronauts themselves went to see it. And people who worked on the ISS but will never go could finally experience what it was like to be up there, at least to some degree. So that was huge. And then that kind of kickstarted a world tour and the creation of multiple kits of the experience. as creators, we really fell in love with the format. Earlier, I was talking about the senses that VR takes over, right? Sight and sound at first. But now we brought in the body, which was not necessarily a new thing in the sense that there were 6 staff experiences. There were things like the void that allowed you to explore it. But so we took that, we scaled it up to a much larger space, a much larger group of people, right? Like I said, up to 160, 70 people. And it really became the closest thing to the holodeck, right? Like you can, your sight, sound, your physical movement, the social aspect. In the Infinite, we didn't have as much tactile feedback, except for a few moments where you're sitting down and you can feel a virtual chair physically. All of that to say that after having done the Infinite, our focus shifted from creating strictly cinematic experiences to creating large-scale, physical, location-based experiences. And whether they were cinematic or not was, again, secondary to the first. So even though we had mostly a history of filming and a minimal amount of interactive experience in terms of the history of the studio, Interstellar Arc is almost fully real-time rendered. Yes, there are still some filmed elements, but it's almost entirely interactive. So again, purpose-built for this format that we had kind of stumbled into while making the ISS experience. So Interstellar Arc had its premiere event on the 5th of November. It was just like felt like the closest thing I can compare it to is when I was a child and I went to Walt Disney World. Like just the physical, we created, it's not just the virtual reality experience, but the whole building is part of the story, right? The minute, even from outside, in short, the experience is about an interstellar voyage, right? And it's told in real time. So the building is decked out like a spaceport. The lobby is where you check in, you line up, you go in, you sit down, put on the headset, you take a shuttle, you go into cryogenic sleep, you wake up 260 years later, and you're on the final approach to an exoplanet 11 light years away. Everything you see, you can touch virtually. It's only been open for about a week. The reactions have been out of this world, no pun intended.
I think the pun is perfect. Even the best spaceships have something that's a little bug. You got to hit the panel or you got sparks flying. You can just build it into the overall effect of things. The curiosity and like the willingness to step into these new modes, it absolutely seems like great content, great partners, a focus on that user experience are really core to your approach and how you make this magic happen. How have you taken the learnings from watching hundreds of people interact with your stories and use that to learn, adapt, and grow the focus of next projects? I'm imagining a project like Interstellar Arc might be a few years in the development, and so are you updating that project and pushing out new content tweaks? Or are you taking that info and thinking about Interstellar Arc 2? How do you balance learning and growing when your sort of production timelines might be more like movies than a weekly sitcom or so?
We certainly learned a lot from the Infinite. So we kind of hit the ground running with Interstellar Arc, even though it's quite different than the Infinite. After it's been now about 4 years since we launched the Infinite, although we started development on Interstellar Arc 3 years ago. We very quickly saw what potential there was, what missed opportunities we had missed with the Infinite, what people wanted to do, what people liked, what people didn't like as much, what made people comfortable, what made people feel good or less good in the experience. So a lot of that came from the Infinite. And then while we were developing Arc, we took a lot of the feedback that everyone who tried it, including the developers, it's a pretty large team, right? And then friends, and we did a lot of play tests, and we're still doing play tests. We're doing one today, even though the project's launched. We're doing a play test here in Montreal, and we're going to keep doing it. I don't think this project is going to sit still. We still haven't streamlined the updating process of the 400 headsets. It's up to 170 people. We're using the Quest 3, which doesn't have a swappable battery. So we really have 2 headsets per person and extras. So it's a lot of headsets to update when we have to push even a small, bug fix. So, but we already have any minute now, we're going to be doing an update for the people in Vegas. Some of that addresses bugs, some of that addresses feedback already that we've gotten. And it's going to keep evolving as long as we can make it evolve. The answer to your question is both. We're both going to evolve Interstellar Arc and are thinking of the continuation. I often describe Interstellar Arc as the first 10 minutes of a science fiction film stretched out to an hour, right? Because it's told at the speed of life, right? Not at the speed of film. So in that sense, speaking about drama, there's a lot less drama in the sense that how much drama would you have in the real world in an hour? What is the point of the experience? Is it to have you live drama or to have you live an experience? Let's say it was possible. You've decided you're leaving the Earth. You're going to go to Area 15 in Las Vegas. You're going to go to the spaceport that they've built there. And you've signed up. All your things are in order. And it's a one-way trip to 11 light years away. And you're going to get there. You're going to get in the shuttle. You're going to fall asleep. You're going to wake up. Next thing you know, you'll be an hour away from arrival. And you're going to live that hour. And then by the end of it, you're going to see this new world with your own eyes. How much more drama do you, how much more do you need in an hour? But then, depending on the audience member, that may or may not be enough. Like they still might have that expectation of, but wait, where were the alien? Where was my laser gun? So we hint at a larger world. And if you dig, you get some hints of what might come next. And maybe one day we'll make the sequel and we're thinking a few steps ahead. Maybe one day there'll be 3 of these that you could all do all at once if you've got the stomach for it. We try to make it very comfortable, but you're still walking in a centrifuge, and for most of the experience, you could live a 3-hour. Yeah.
I was in a free roam VR experience in Tokyo, and one of the most delightful parts of it was understanding that we were all basically in the same physical room, but there were slight indicators. If you weren't in the same part of the story, you would show up like a game avatar. Your avatar would look different, so you could not run into people, but that you also would know that they were on a different mission. And it was so delightful just to know that I was in a space and to know that others were on their own journey, and even that sense of presence and safety and understanding was just incredibly lovely. Paul, I'm way too interested compared to the time that we have today. One of the questions, I'm going to take it a little personal now, and through the conversations that I have on the Tech Glow Up, I've learned that founders and CEOs all bring a very unique perspective and framework to how they approach their work. And I'm really curious about how you like to tackle hard challenges. Do you have a framework for how you deal with the tough choices that co-founders experience on a long journey that you've been on?
Yeah. So part of it is I always trust my gut, to a fault, but I can allow myself to do that because I feel like even if I'm wrong, I know Felix and Stefan are going to do the same thing. And if we all feel the same way, we're probably right. If 2 out of 3 feel one way, the 2 out of 3 are probably right. If we're all in different directions, then we're not on the right track. So that resolves things usually naturally. I mean, when something's wrong, we need to these days there are a few things, kind of existential, direction questions of the studio, where exactly do we go next? We've got a sense of what we need to do next, but how do we get there and what exactly that is and what are we going to focus on exactly trying to accomplish? It's been one of these moments where we're not all perfectly aligned, but that also points in a direction by triangulation, right? I think working with people you profoundly trust is key. I couldn't imagine the last 12 years in a situation where there was any form of conflict or where we weren't fundamentally aligned or we were in this for weird reasons. We're all in it for, honestly, I will not take a payday to keep doing what I'm doing, right? The way we're doing it. I'm not saying we could. I'm not saying there is a payday that we could take.
Don't
We're
do
not
it. I
taking.
don't advise.
But when we explore the possible futures, some of them seem to point towards more money in the short term. But I'm much more interested in continuing to explore this medium with as much freedom as possible, but while still surviving, right? And still being viable. So we don't want to be so blind to financial opportunity that we collapse. So it's about towing that line.
Yeah.
But really, I think that the only thing we have is, if we have anything special in this world or in the industry, something to offer the world, yeah, it's this kind of obsession with pushing immersive storytelling, mostly VR based, forward. However we
I
do
love
that.
this. It's this combination of all the things that you need, right? You have a mission that pushes the whole organization forward. You have this focus and passion about story that really brings your users into the equation. And then the thing that you said at the top of the question, I'm just enamored with, right? That you have this explicit trust, right? And that you're expecting your co-founders to be passionate, to be engaged, to be pushing at the end. And that gives you permission to have a similar level of engagement and direction in the space.
And I'll just add, I'm talking about the founders here, but it's not just the
Yeah.
founders, it's the team, right? It's the entire team and our whole executive team and all our leads and every single team member, right? It's the wider that net gets, the harder it is for everyone to be perfectly aligned. So there's kind of the ground zero, which is, I guess, the founders, right? And then it kind of spreads outwards. But you want as many people as possible to be on board with the vision and to be sensitive to anyone who isn't, for better or for worse, right? If they're not on board,
How do you do? Yeah. How do you do that as you grow?
it's really hard. I mean, these days we're launching, going to be finished for a while, honestly, but we're launching, the biggest project we've ever made, and a lot of strain on a lot of people at the studio, right? And not only that, but we're also starting up the next things. It's a lot, right, for everyone. And, hopefully not going to have too much collateral damage going through this. And we're trying to navigate as gracefully as possible, but it's a tense, tough, exciting, wonderful, scary time.
Paul, we are close to the end, and I'd love it if you could join me in a quick speed round. Are you ready?
Okay. Let's try.
Fantastic. Paul, if there was one takeaway that you'd want our listeners to walk away with today, what would it be?
Come see Interstellar Arc at Area 15. But I think I'm really, I've expressed how much I'm in love with this medium. And I think I would say it's an important medium that a lot of people are underestimating. I think whether they've had a bad experience or too few good experiences with it, or maybe they just not given it enough attention. And this is a message, I guess, to audiences, but also to investors and people in the tech world. And it seems extremely short-sighted to me to think that this is not the future. I think for me, it's now. We're doing it now, but we can't expect everyone to do it. There's other things that need to be done for sure. But I think most people should realize that we live in a world that is a certain way, and this is a medium that allows you to combine the digital realm to the physical realm. It's inevitable that this is how things are going to be. And so if you're thinking long, yes, of course, AI is a huge part of everything right now. So I think a lot of people are mostly focused on that these days. But ultimately, sometimes I think a lot of people are like, why are these companies so stubborn with their immersive devices, right? They're like, Meta, releasing these headset. Apple released their headset. Samsung just did. And then it's like, a lot of people are like, nobody wants these. No one's buying them. And yet these companies, they keep making these devices. I think they understand that this is inevitable, right? And that it's also going to take a while to build. It's such a paradigm shift in so many ways. Even the smartphone was not such a paradigm shift, right? It basically brought the internet and your computer into your pocket in a very graceful way, and UI and UX evolved There was a nice initial jump from Apple at the beginning, and then they continued to evolve it, and it's pretty elegant by now. Most of the content that existed was just reformatted for the screen, and it also created new things like TikTok and things like that weren't maybe quite as possible before, I guess, but they're not fundamentally that different. Whereas everything in an immersive environment doesn't have to be different. You can put the floating screen in your virtual field of view. That's not really taking advantage of the medium. There's just so much to do, so much foundational work technologically, conceptually, UX, UI, and then just new things that we can't even think of that you want to do in immersion. Anyway, all this to say that it's such a fertile ground. It's so clearly the future of how we experience digital that I think everyone should have patience and faith that that's where things are going, right? And give it another shot once in a while. Come see Interstellar Arc, like I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually count that as your key takeaway and your hot take, because this idea that like immersive, that like digital is shifting where the screens are, and that there's a whole new suite of tools that you can be using and experiencing, I think is fantastic. As well as, let's go see Interstellar Arc at Area 15. I'm such a nerd about strategic planning. Quickly, what quarter are you thinking in right now as you're doing all of this launch work, as you're updating Interstellar Arc? Where's your planning brain right now?
It's really hard not to be obsessively focused on this and the next quarter and Interstellar Arc's success. In some ways, we're betting the house in Vegas with this show. Like, we put everything in it. If it doesn't have a minimum of success, we're in real trouble. Starting other things as well. But, you know, it's really about how do we take what we've done with Arc and really make babies, and not just Arc itself. Yes, we want to bring Arc elsewhere around the world. It's going to stay in Vegas, but we want to create more of it. It's not a touring show like The Infinite, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's like Cirque du Soleil. They're traveling tents, right? And then you have the Vegas shows that are permanent, right? That's our Vegas search show, right? In a sense. So we want to have more of those.
Interstellar Arc Dubai. Let's go.
There you go. That's exactly
Get it
what
in
we
the
would like as
wall,
well.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
I know time is short. How can people follow up and learn more and stay connected with the arc of your work?
Yeah, so we are on all the platforms. Felix and Paul on every platform. Interstellar Arc is on most platforms as well. I think just Google or ChatGPT. You'll find us.
We did a good job at branding, and I love it. Find us out in the world. Oh my goodness, Paul Raphaël, this has been such a pleasant deep dive into a storyteller's perspective on virtual reality, and also like a technical innovator's journey in engaging audiences. I love that your work has both this creative side focused on engagement and this technical side, but both said time and time again, just come back to the experience of your viewers. I have to imagine that just laser focus on who you're trying to speak to has to be a big reason for 13 plus years of fantastic storytelling and interactive work in VR. Thank you so much for joining me on the Tech Glow Up. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
If you've made it this far in the podcast, I really appreciate you. Thanks for listening. Please make sure to like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode of the Tech Glow Up. And hey, can I ask you a favor? If you really enjoyed this episode, could you share it on your Instagram stories or maybe post the link with what you enjoyed on LinkedIn? This sort of sharing and engaging really helps small podcasters like me reach the audience that I know really cares about these kinds of conversations.